Approaches this from an alchemical perspective and says, in the alchemical exercise of turning base metal into gold, what you have to first do is reduce base metal to materia prima in order to impose on it the new form of gold.
Right.
And what's
beautiful.
What Our Lady is she is the embodiment of materia prima. She's the whole universe at its most basic principle, personified. And what she does is she turns everything into gold. So she is she's the alchemical queen, essentially.
Beautiful.
And when you realize that that is the role that Our Lady really plays, that it's not all about these kind of rosy-cheeked 19th century images, but actually what we're talking about is the personification and embodiment of materia prima and the entire universe. Then when you look at the world, you realize it's Marian. And
Speak to a king, and a king will appear. When you speak blessings over your child and say things like, every day you become kinder, or you always seem to figure things out, or your persistence is your magic, or your deep feelings are going to be the key to helping others, or you have such a powerful heart. When you say these things over your child, one or two times, it plants a seed that they matter, that they are important. They believe what you say. There's another saying that if you tell a child 9 times who they are, they'll tell you that on the 10th time.
You to be thinking about this in a room at a time when we're going through extraordinary technological change. And this is a rare opportunity for me to talk about a much longer time horizon that is usually permitted in a public talk. So I'm going to be using that opportunity to explore what we can learn from history. We're going to be looking backwards in order to understand our present and the potentials for our future. We're going to talk about Renaissance paintings, steam engines, bird guano, and AI slop. So get comfortable, get settled, and we'll get started.
All right, happy Friday, happy 2026. I started listening to this lecture from Kate Crawford earlier this week. I listened to maybe 20 or 30 minutes of it, and it really hung in my head because she starts talking about the Renaissance and how perspective, linear perspective, starting around the Renaissance became our standard mode of perception. It's hard for me to imagine that the world exists outside of linear perspective. So it's really been putting me through some thought exercises, but I connected it with this other strange perception video that I saw several months ago, and I will copy it and post it.
Here's a fact that science insists is true, but that I cannot make my brain understand. It has to do with these two shapes up here, a cube and a ball. For hundreds of years, there has been a thought experiment called Molyneux's question, and it's very simple. If you had someone who was blind from birth, so that they only knew objects through touch, if they regained their sight later in life, if you showed them two simple shapes, a cube and a ball, would they, without touching them, be able to tell you which was which? Now, your instinct is going to be to say, oh, this isn't a question at all. They would see this and say, well, I remember feeling those sharp corners in my hand. And they would see this and say, well, obviously that's the smooth shape I remember feeling in my hand. That's the cube, that's the ball. And that is wrong. We know this because in 2011, after hundreds of years,
this was a powerful optical illusion. People in the 1400s were absolutely awestruck by what seemed to be magic, a reflection turned real. The man was the architect Filippo Brunelleschi, and the technology was linear perspective, or artificial perspective. Now, this technology would become widely accepted across Europe, and it would reshape art and architecture, as you can tell from these two paintings that are around 150 years apart. But it also did something more fundamental. It gradually became accepted that this is just the way things look. So linear perspective was a profound invention that at the same time denied its own artifice by laying claim to being a natural representation of reality, when of course it's anything but. But it also shifted the way the world is ordered. Surveyors began to use perspectival instruments to occupy territories. Perspective made the world measurable, controllable.
Experiment. They found 5 subjects who had all been born blind and then regained their sight with surgery much later. When shown these basic shapes but not allowed to touch them, they could only guess as to which was the cube and which was the ball. They could not automatically map what they saw onto what they felt. And this is just one of the fascinating things you learn when hearing from people who regained their sight later in life. So many things you take for granted, like the fact that objects that are far away are smaller in your vision, they were shocked to see. And in fact, something they really struggle with is trying to figure out how far away something is just by looking at it. In other words, your eyes are not seeing the world as it exists. Your brain is mapping a world onto what you see. And even though I just said that, I still can't really grasp it.
Transcript of the interrogation. This is where he stops. This is his final statement. But according to the transcript that in due course will be released by his supporters in Wittenberg, he then goes on to utter a ringing phrase that will probably be the most famous thing he ever says. I cannot do otherwise. Here I stand. Hier stehe ich. And this phrase will ring across the empire and indeed, Dominic, down the centuries.
Oh, brilliant.
And so basically his enemies have handed Luther exactly what they didn't want to do, which is a chance to make his case in front of the emperor himself. The simple monk opposed by all the panoply and power of the emperor of the church. And, it's an amazing moment.
Tom, that moment, by the way, that phrase, here I stand, I can do no other, or however you translate it, Diarmaid MacCulloch in his book on the Reformation says that's the motto, not just of the Reformation, but of all modern Western civilization.
Yeah, living my truth.
Yeah, that's what it is, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Do you know what the word hamartia means and where it came from? Well, I'm here to...
Happy Saturday, page 89 here. Can we see that? comes from Greek people watching bow and arrow contests. As in, you missed the mark. And Marcia, and Martia, and Marcia, something like that. So it seems to be less, and our greatest strength can be our greatest weakness too, right? And hamartia is like your fundamental character flaw, like your fatal flaw. It's like in your stars kind of thing. So it seems to be less, if we're at the wishing tree, forgive me for this infraction and this infraction. It seems to be more like, please help me aim in the right direction. Happy Sunday.
I feel that I am merely an agent, giving you some keys which have been given to me.